U.S. President Joe Biden expands a Trump-era order banning American persons and entities from investing in 59 Chinese companies. Why has Biden apparently doubled down on his predecessor's protectionism? And today marks World Oceans Day, and this year's theme is the ocean, life and livelihoods. How can countries cooperate on protecting the marine environment when the ocean is often politically charged? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. U.S. President Joe Biden signed an executive order last Thursday banning U.S. persons and entities from investing in 59 Chinese companies. The executive order builds on a Trump-era blacklist targeting companies allegedly tied to the Chinese military. The order claims that U.S. investments in these Chinese companies undermine the security or democratic values of the U.S. and their allies. China urged the U.S. to respect market laws and principles and provide a fair, just and non-discriminatory business and investment environment for Chinese enterprises. What does the recent measure mean for Chinese companies, U.S. investors, and China-U.S. relations? I'm pleased to be joined via Skype by David Blair, Vice President and Senior Economist of the Center for China and Globalization. And with me here in the studio, Professor Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center for International Business Ethics of the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Mr. Blair, now let me go to you first. The list is called in full non-specially designated nationals Chinese military industrial complex companies list. It's seen as a more aggressive move, and it provides greater clarity than Trump-era executive order last November. Some people had previously hoped that President Biden would rescind the order entirely. What do you think prompted the Biden administration not to scrap it, but to build on the Trump list instead?
I don't think the practical economic consequences of this particular move are very large. These companies don't depend especially on U.S. capital markets. China already has a large capital market itself. So the direct effects are small, but the symbolic effect is very large, in my opinion. I want to read a quote that I found from Joe Biden from March 25th. He said, "China has an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That is not going to happen on my watch." Well, I think what we're seeing is a consistent move toward creating a Cold War situation between China and the U.S. by this administration, probably stronger than anything we saw during the Trump administration, especially during the first 3 years of the Trump administration. So I think this is very dangerous. The 2020s are likely to be a dangerous period while China continues to grow and assumes a leadership role in the United States, in the world. How's the United States going to react to that? I also think the 2020s are likely to be a very economically troubled decade. Larry Summers, who was the Secretary of Treasury under President Clinton and President Obama's chief economic advisor, said recently that this administration's economic policies, macroeconomic policies, are the most irresponsible he's seen in 40 years. So I think we're likely to see very troubled economic times in the U.S. over the next decade, and creating a Cold War situation with China is very dangerous, in my opinion, and I think these kinds of moves are not helpful at all.
All right. Professor Liu, what is your take on some of these points? The starting point, what is in President Biden's mind and his administration's mind to put out this list? Does that signal that he's moving towards a Cold War era style confrontation with China?
Well, in terms of the essence, it is really a continuation of the Trump administration, who did really prepare the footprint, and now he is really moving forward with his legacy towards containing China. But the style is rather different because Trump was really bargaining one-on-one basis and primarily focused on practical matters like trade deficit, like currency issue, and the market access issue. But now the Joe Biden government is trying to elevate this to the ideological height so that he can really ally on the ideological level with more partners on the so-called the universal value. So this is really a beginning attempt to isolate China and to target China as the animosity, and now his true face is far more clearer than Trump, that it is there to simply to step on China and to make sure that China will be the follower instead of the challenge. And one more significant issue that during the previous the security strategy report by Trump, so China and Russia were named as the pair revisionist powers, but now during this strategy by the Joe Biden, China is the only geopolitical and geoeconomic greatest challenge. So this is something that we have to be very much alert, and more is there to come in this direction towards China.
Okay, in a relevant Treasury Department statement, it said that President Biden finds the use of products or services of these listed companies facilitate, quote unquote, serious human rights abuses constituting unusual and extraordinary threats to the United States and its allies. Now, human rights, as we know, is a highly controversial but also very subjective matter. Mr. Blair, what is the implication of the inclusion of such a criterion? Is there any way to justify such a ban based on, this very fluid standard, let's say?
I think Professor Liu is exactly right. This is becoming an ideologically driven administration. They're pushing for maintenance of the U.S.-led world order, and to do that, they have to have an enemy, and it's nice to have an evil enemy. Now, there are human rights abuses in many countries. You can impose sanctions on all of them, but I think the key factor going forward is we need to have as good relations as possible between China and the United States in order to maintain peace and stability in the world. And also, the United States has a lot of domestic problems, and we really should be concentrating on them rather than continuing this policy of intervening around the world.
Professor Liu, is there any ground to justify the U.S. adopting such a ban based on, market rules and principles? I mean, the United States has been the one pounding China, right, against state, intervention in the market.
Well, I totally agree with Professor Blair, is that, this is simply an enemy without they're really targeting. And, China is an important member of the world peacekeeping utilities. So, how these trade and how this laborers work and how these investments are going to be related with the military, and that's totally unjustified without sufficient evidence. And so this is very clear. You talk about human rights, you talk about double use. All this is really a very strong and very obvious excuse that is there to bash China and to create the vicious face of China. So, but for that, I believe the world is getting more and more transparent. And so when we read the reports from Switzerland, from Germany, from the Great Britain, they really see very different relationship with China, the strategic engagement. They do recognize there are problems. Okay, United States, Great Britain, or the entire EU, they all have problems, be it human rights issue, be it climate change issue, be it investment, market rule issue, etc. So how we can really perceive these, questions, issues, or even problems, and how we can really move on a constructive manner so that countries can engage to work towards the common problem right now, the climate change and also the pandemic. And this is something that really a ethical leader should be doing instead of now, polarizing the world and naming an enemy without, and to create hatred and animosity when those problems that are looming even over the sky of the United States are not being addressed properly.
Latest data from Chinese customs also show trade rebounding significantly between China and the United States. For instance, latest figure released on Monday show that US-China trade rose by 28% from January to May this year to $2.3 trillion. Chinese imports among that jumped from the United States by almost 50%. Of course, exports also jumped by nearly 40%. So, Mr. Blair, what do these numbers tell you about the state of relationship between the two sides, and what kind of impact will this kind of sanctions blacklist have on the U.S. economy?
Well, to answer the second question first, the fact that investments in the United States are politicized makes it less likely that people will invest in the United States. Because if you're a company from anywhere, basically, you always have some fear that you could fall politically afoul of the administration and they could make your investment less worthwhile. Just a few years ago, Chinese companies were investing very heavily in the United States. This had lots of benefits for American workers, and now I think every Chinese company will be afraid to do so. So I think that will have a negative effect on the American labor force.
Yeah.
I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we need to increase wages in the United States and we need to secure better jobs for people, but most of the problems in that sector were created by domestic policies over the last 40 years. Monopolization of the economy, financialization of the economy, very expansionary monetary policy. That all hurts poor people or working people and helps the very rich. And it's convenient to blame China for that, but it's mostly not China's fault. I think we're seeing an increase in demand from the United States, so Chinese companies are selling goods there now. But this increased demand is largely artificial. It's created by a spending and monetary policy stimulus which is not sustainable in the long term.
We're going to leave it there. Many thanks to my guests, David Blair and Professor Liu Baocheng.